Hey, Gen Max. Today we are talking about how to vote when you're outside the United States. So this is, of course, for U.S. citizens, U.S. voters, but a lot of you are living in Mexico on November, whatever the date is that we vote. So, and there's, of course, primary elections and whatnot, but you still have the right to vote in the United States. And although most of us try to avoid talking about U.S. politics when we're overseas, and, you know, probably a lot try to avoid thinking about U.S. politics just to keep our lives happy, it is something we still have the right to vote. And especially voting at the federal level, a lot of the stuff you're going to vote on is going to impact the relationship between the United States and Mexico or whatever country that you live in. So today I am super excited about this interview. I have Susan from the U.S. Vote Foundation and also the Overseas Vote Foundation. I'll let her correct that. I'm not even going to try to pronounce her name. She's going to pronounce it because I don't want to be corrected on that. Let's get Susan on here. And first, Susan, maybe you could introduce yourself to folks.
Happily, yes. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the invitation to speak to you and your audience. My full name is, get ready, Susan Dzieduszycka Swina. And the story is even longer than the name, but that's for another day. We have a lot to talk about today, to talk about overseas voting. It's a super important time to talk about it. There's so much going on. There's so much good to tell you. And yes, I am the president and CEO of U.S. Vote Foundation. That's the umbrella organization, like the parent. And underneath that is our legacy and founding group called Overseas Vote now, because we can only have one foundation. But our URL, the one that's most important for you, still has overseasvotefoundation.org in it, because that was our original URL and we didn't want to change it. So if you want to rush to the website right now and see what I'm going to be talking about, you can go to overseasvotefoundation.org. And there's a close interrelationship between all of our websites. You will encounter it. Doesn't need more explanation right now, but you'll find yourself using them both without any problem.
Oh, well, thank you, Susan. And we're going to talk about other websites too out there, because I found a number of websites with the same kind of topic area. So we'll talk about that later on in the interview. But before we get into like nuts and bolts of how you do it, let's get into the why people should do this. Why vote when you're living in another country? Maybe you have an intention to come back to the U.S., or maybe you don't have an intention to come back to the U.S. Maybe you're living part-time like Kat and I, because we vote in Oregon, and Oregon is 100% vote by mail. Love it. It is the best system. But we will be able to vote in advance of going to Mexico. We'll be actually in Mexico on voting day. We won't have to do this, but a lot of people will be in Mexico if they're part-timers. So you're living in Mexico. Why is this important for folks to vote in U.S. elections?
There's so many things I really want to say to answer that, and I hope I can do it in an organized fashion. But as an American, I mean, there's one part of it that's very fundamental. It is our civic duty to vote. We have a voice. Overseas Americans number between the 3 and 6 million. There's so many of us. We can have an influence in these very tight races. All ballots are counted. Don't get swayed by the myths that go around about overseas voting and overseas ballots, the idea that they're not counted. And that is addressed on our website in more than one place, but it is a legal requirement that all ballots are counted for an election to be certified. Your ballot will count, and it does matter, especially in razor-thin elections. As an American abroad, our vote is just as valuable as any other vote, and it is not difficult to do. The system has been highly modernized. There's really no reason you shouldn't do it. It could be challenging from Mexico due to mail systems, but a lot of the overseas voting program is online, and I can talk about that in detail when you want at the right time. Mm-hmm. But just a bottom line, if you're not going to use it, you might lose it. If you care about your country, which I'm sure your audience does, we all do, you can have an influence through your vote. And I just, why throw that away? The more that people throw away their opportunity to vote, the downside to that is they give more weight to the votes that do come in. And those may not be the votes that you want augmented. Yeah? Think about it that way too. By opting out, you're losing the opportunity to amplify what you actually, the outcome that you actually want.
Yeah, and that's a great point because, I mean, I don't want to get into politics, but, between the U.S. and Mexico, there's one presidential candidate who speaks rather poorly of Mexico, and one that doesn't really even speak about Mexico, I guess. But there are some choices to be made, and you should support those people, like even your family and friends back home, making sure the country is a place that people would want to live in, and it's a country that you would want to return to in the future if you so choose. Let's look at numbers here. Like, what percentage of people who are overseas do vote? Because when I was looking through this, I was like, that's a really low percentage. And as I learned through your website that it's a lot easier than I expected, let's talk about that percentage first.
It's sad to report to you that under 10% of the eligible overseas voters take part in the franchise. That's such an incredible statistic. It's probably around at the maximum 7% it's been, but it's probably between 3 and 7. It's really pathetically low. And it's tragic, too, because the program has been completely reformed and modernized. It's much easier than it was in the past. A lot of Americans abroad think that, whatever happened in the year 2000 is still the way things are. It's not at all the case.
Yeah, actually, when I was digging through your website, other websites, there's actually a great federal website that posts a lot of these statistics, but about half of military members abroad do vote, just less than half. But half of those of us who are not in the military abroad, or less than 10% of us who are not in the military abroad, do vote. So it can have a big impact on the election. And, I was looking through numbers and it's like, okay, well, Biden beat Trump by 7 million votes or something, which is like, a big chunk that, the voters abroad probably couldn't have swung the popular vote. But as people know, we don't have a popular, the popular vote doesn't matter in the U.S. It is the Electoral College. And a lot of those swing states were decided by less than 50,000 votes. So it'd be pretty easy to change an election, especially if you live in one of those swing states. Your vote really counts. And that's kind of one of the things I don't like about U.S. elections. We recently had elections in Mexico, and that, the Mexican elections are very well done. I read about this, is that there's not corruption in Mexican elections. There may be corruption in other places, but Mexican elections are pretty well accepted internationally. They vote on a Sunday, which is great. They vote in person mostly. It's a great system, and it is a true popular vote. But in the U.S., your vote counts more if you're living in, Wisconsin or Michigan or, one of those swing states. So especially if you live in one of those states, I really want you to vote. And other places, your senators, your congresspeople, all those things matter. But for president, it matters more in certain places.
Regarding the number of military versus the number of U.S. citizens abroad, the U.S. citizens abroad far outnumber the military.
Yes.
However, the military, given their infrastructure, they have a whole different support system for voting. They have what they call voting assistance officers on every base, and those officers are required really to help their compatriots with voting questions and with getting registered if they so choose. So they're there as a support. There's an internal kind of network. They also have other things like cost-free express mail, ballot return. All of these things are very hard to give to U.S. citizens abroad. That's why the online services are so important, because they are really what made the difference. Our organization was the first to put the overseas voter registration and ballot request process online. And that just completely broke through and changed the entire process from start to finish, all the way to getting your ballot. You can even get your ballot online. You will probably have to print it out, but the receipt of the ballot is instant. And a lot of ballots were very late, and people weren't able to actually vote when they requested their ballot because it was late. And that makes a big difference in a place like Mexico, where your mail service may not be optimized. That's, the crux of it I just wanted to mention was that, the military voters do have better infrastructure for supporting voters. And for those of us who are overseas, we may be a little bit more kind of embedded in our local culture, maybe don't have our thoughts on the deadline for registering and requesting an overseas ballot. Maybe we're not signed up for voter alerts. Those are things you can do on our website so you don't miss elections. The services are there if you go look for them. It's just that the military, they have them more, it's more in their face, we could say.
Yeah, that's true. Because, those of us who are living in Mexico hopefully are integrated with the local community. We can't participate in election process in Mexico unless you're unless you're a Mexican citizen too, which some of you are. And we're also not seeing the ads. I think when it comes up to election season in the United States, you're constantly bombarded with the ads, and you're like, oh, of course the election's coming up. When will it be over? But let's see here. Is any U.S. citizen eligible to vote if you're overseas? Are there some restrictions on people who could vote in the U.S. but who can't vote if they're outside the U.S.?
The eligibility requirements are pretty simple when you're abroad. In some ways, some of these things are more streamlined than when you're in the U.S. I would actually put out the premise and the argument that voting from abroad is easier than voting in the U.S. for most of our citizens. And there are a couple of reasons for that. And I'm going to answer specifically how to find out about your eligibility, but let me just finish on this one concept of why it's easy. And one of those reasons is that to register to vote as an overseas voter, which is something you need to do even if you know you're registered already as a domestic voter, you have to have the status of an overseas voter. So to register as an overseas voter and to request your overseas absentee ballot is one form once a year. It's one process. It's not two. In the U.S., you have to register to vote, and then if your state allows it, you can request your absentee ballot. As an overseas voter, you're automatically allowed, obviously, an overseas absentee ballot. As I mentioned before, you can receive it online if you so choose. You have the option, if you don't receive your ballot on time, there's an emergency ballot. There are no notarization requirements. There might be a witness requirement, but that's another overseas American that can just be around to sign. So that's not a big deal. All of those things make it easier than it is to vote sometimes domestically, where you might be in a state where they don't allow you an absentee ballot. Maybe you're a caretaker, maybe you're disabled, maybe you've got kids or you've got work on Tuesday and you can't vote otherwise. We get that automatically. So that's really nice. It's like the Oregon vote by mail system. Really good.
Oh my God. Yeah. I got to say, for you, anyone who questions vote for by mail, it is so incredible. Since we moved 20 years ago, we moved from Georgia. We were going to our polling place, which was kind of nice. It's a little bit more like Mexico in terms of you met the little women who were there running the election, and that was fine. But oh my God, it's so much easier to just fill it out. They give you a guide. Oh, okay.
The other thing about overseas absentee balloting is that 6 weeks prior to the election, every single state has to have the overseas ballot ready to send. So if you've requested to receive it online and you have a printer and that's not a problem, you're going to get it 6 weeks before the election, which means that you can possibly overcome a slow mail system like they have in Mexico. Things like that. So going back, though, I don't want to forget your eligibility question. If you go on overseasvotefoundation.org, you'll see there's a big section for overseas voter services. And you can get to our state voter information directory there, look up your state. There's always going to be a tab for domestic and overseas. So click the overseas tab and look up the eligibility. But, it's really basic. being an American citizen. And keep in mind, if you're a dual citizen, you can still vote as an overseas voter, no problem. Being 18 or older on election day, that means you can register or request your ballot prior if you're going to be 18 on election day. Just really basic things like that. And as for identification, which you might be kind of maybe mixing up with eligibility, those two things kind of get intertwined. Having a voter ID, most states only require the last 4 digits of your social security number to register and request your ballot from abroad. They really cannot require you to have a valid state driver's license or a valid state ID. But if you still have one, let's say you're moving between the two countries, you're really not permanently living in Mexico, but you're going to be there for the election, you want to request your overseas ballot, you can even do it from the U.S. if you know you're going to be abroad at the time of the election. That's perfectly fine. Your ID requirements might be actually less than what you would have in the US. Now, there are some states that ask for some extra things, things different from other states. For example, there are probably about 7 states, I can't remember exactly, that want your full social security number. That's not a super heavy lift. They don't usually want your passport number because it's a federal document. The state's not really in a position to verify that. So usually it has to do with the social security number. You can also say that you don't have an ID and they send you a voter ID card. And if there's a special requirement, like in Wisconsin, they have a new requirement that voters who are temporarily abroad need to send a picture of their ID.
Okay, so yeah, this is interesting. So as long as you are out of the country on November, whatever the Tuesday is, 5th this year, okay, you can use this process even if you're not out of the country on November 4th, right? But you do have to be out of the country, is that correct?
I don't like this example of the day before the election. That's a bit tight. You would miss in a lot of states, you'd miss the registration and ballot request deadline.
But no, I guess what I'm saying is,
you are in the U.S. and it's August and you know you're leaving for Mexico in October and you're going to be there during the election or September, whatever, and you want to get your ballot down there. Yeah, you can request it before you leave. I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, exactly. But you do have to be out of the country.
To request it, no. To receive the ballot, yes. And vote, yes. Oh, this brings up a very important point. Especially because it's Mexico and you're so close to the U.S. Me, I'm sitting in Germany, right? But a lot of people, they receive their ballot and they vote and they think, oh, I'll just bring it back with me or I'll give it to my friend who's going back to the U.S. and they'll drop it in the U.S. mail. No, if you could do that, people would vote from abroad in the U.S. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking. I was like, oh, if I was in a tough to vote state, why don't I want to just do this?
You need that overseas overseas postmark. Go to your local post office, get it stamped, or go to the consulate or embassy and you put it in the diplomatic pouch. Make sure that they're going to stamp it with the date.
Okay, but there's going to be an easier way, it seems, for at least some people electronically to return your, which we're going to talk about. But let's not talk about that yet. Let's talk about that in a second. Okay, let's get some clarity here. I've actually put on my journalist hat now, and I've been holding this video for nearly a month while I've been pursuing the specifics about what Susan just talked about. And sadly, I wasn't able to find a definitive answer as to whether or not you can send your ballot back and get it postmarked in the United States. So let me tell you what I did find. And that is that there is definitely a rule if you use one of those emergency ballots that Susan mentioned. Those definitely have to be postmarked in another country and they have to come from another country. They could be sent in by FedEx. They could go to, if you're in Mexico City, it's really easy. You could just drop it off at the consulate. That's great. Or if you're in a city that has a consular office, but La Paz doesn't, so we'd be looking at the mail. I was not able to uncover anything or anyone who could specifically tell me that a regular ballot, a regular overseas ballot, could not be returned inside the United States. So you could return it and it did not have to originate overseas. There didn't have to be a postmark. Trust me, I called secretaries of state. I talked to a number of voting organizations. I talked to people who deliver mail across the border. There's nothing that I could find that says it definitely has to be starting out in Mexico, because the mail system in Mexico is not great. And I wouldn't encourage putting your ballot in the mail system in Mexico. That just seems like timeliness is not necessarily a guarantee. So if you are in one of those states where you have to return your mail by mail, theoretically, according to the federal law, you could send it back with someone else and they could drop it in a mailbox in the United States. If you had one of those mail services that takes mail back to the United States and brings your mail back down from the United States, you had some friends coming or something like that, that would all be possible, except for there are some states. Boy, there are some states that really want to make it difficult to vote under the guise of people are going to cheat. Even though there hasn't been documented cheating, you know my politics. People should always have the right to vote, and we should make it easier for people to vote. Anyway, some states restrict who can touch your ballot. So you can make your own decisions there as to how you want to deal with that. If you want to give your ballot to your friends or your cousin or something who's going to be back in the state, you want to drop it off with a mail service, that is up to you. However, note that in some states, it's illegal for anyone but you to put your ballot inside a ballot box or whatever it is. So that's where we got to. Hopefully more and more states will be like Oregon and California, Washington, a number of states who just make it easy to return your ballot either by fax, which you can do online, or email, or, a number of methods, maybe an online portal. But that's what's taking me a little bit to get this video out. But let's continue on with the video. There's always talk of purging the voter rolls in certain states. So how do I know that I'm eligible? Like maybe I have a felony in my past, not that I have a felony in my past. And there's some people where it starts to question whether or not you've been purged or whether or not your votes have been restored. And then there's the question of like, can I get in trouble?
That's a lot in one question. Let me see if I can unpack it. Okay. For those of you who have a felony or misdemeanor record, please go to usvotefoundation.org and click into our Voting Rights Restoration Guide and look up your state situation. Okay. Misdemeanors usually doesn't take away your voting rights. Okay. That's a really different, if you have a felony record, you may have lost your voting rights. It's state specific how that gets reinstated. That would be your first step. Resolve that first before you register or request a ballot domestically or overseas. Okay? So let's park that. That's a very particular situation, and it does affect millions of voters, and it's terrible.
I know. Yeah. It's so frustrating.
Our situation here is complicated enough right now. But while I'm on it, we also have a guide for voters with disabilities. Apparently 1 in 6 Americans is disabled or has a disability. There are a lot of accommodations for that. That's also more of a local issue because, But going back to how do you find out, how you can send your ballot back and forth, how you can send your request back and forth. We have the state voter information directory. In there is a section called Voter Materials Transmission Options. Every state could be different, and overseas is different from domestic. We have a lot more check boxes in the places where it's a matrix. You'll see a chart. It's a matrix. You've got registration, ballot request, receiving the ballot, returning the ballot, and then all the different ways you could do it by mail, online, by email, whatever. It's all, the boxes are checked what's possible. Okay?
Okay.
So that's a really important place to go. Again, it's at usvotefoundation.org, and it's the state voter information. If you want to just go to overseas vote, that's fine too. It'll lead you, always lead you to the right place. So you can't get lost. That's okay. But let me talk about the voting process from overseas, because we haven't touched.
Actually, before I get to the voting process, I want to go back because I don't think that you've quite answered the question I had,
which is there were too many.
Yeah, no, I put a lot of them in there, didn't I? Say I'm in Georgia, which is where I used to live, which has much more of a problem than Oregon, I think. I'm not getting my mail there. I'm having my mail forwarded to a mail forwarding service that scans my mail or whatnot. And I haven't, for some reason, they've taken me off the voter rolls because I haven't voted in the last couple elections or something. How do I?
Oh, yes. Okay. Okay. Now I got it right. The purging thing. All right. Overseas voters. You must file your registration and ballot request form. It's one form that does both simultaneously.
Okay.
Every year.
Even not election year.
Okay. Every
not a federal election year.
And
every year you want to vote. Okay.
Every year you want to vote.
Okay.
Calendar year that you want to vote. So the sooner you do it, the better. You can also check, are you registered, through a registration check service. So once you've filed your form, I would wait a couple weeks and check, but usually an election official will confirm that your application was received. If they don't, there are easy ways to get in touch with them. And we have a directory that lists every single one of them. And there's 7,500 offices in the U.S. for local election officials. And they're there for you. They're there to help you. Think of them as your friends.
Yes. Seriously. And so really, if there was a problem, the sooner the better to find out about it. And they're not going to send me a ballot if I'm not registered, right? I mean, if I'm in Georgia and they're like, sorry, you've been purged. Yeah, I'm guessing it's not as much of a problem, but I just can feel like they seem to be, in certain states, finding lots of reasons to remove people from the voter rolls.
They are. And that's why it's important to file your request this year and check it, right? And you should be able to get your ballot 6 weeks before the election. That gives you, when you know that. There's also another
Let's
really good thing. And I know you don't want to talk about the process. So I'm going to the end of it now. But I was just going to say there's this thing called ballot tracking now. That's another modernization feature that's really great. So let me put the process of overseas voting into a quick few-step thing. All right. So we already said you got to do it once a year. What do I mean? I mean, you go to the website. If you want to go straight to it, go to usvotefoundation.org, click overseas ballot, absentee ballot request. Go in there, you fill out your information. It asks you the questions. It's a guided process. And for most states, this is unfortunately not California, not Connecticut, not Alabama, not New York, but pretty much all the others. We have a special feature that will even allow you to apply your signature to the form and send it directly to your election office as an email attachment right through our system, no printing, no scanning. Okay, now there's some states that want that original document on paper, so you have to plan to print, sign, and send it off. There's no way around that, okay? But for the majority of states, it's a few minutes, it's a guided process, and what that helps you with, it makes sure that you're not making errors, like the errors of omission. When we first started studying how people fill out the forms and everything way back when, 20 years ago when I started this, we saw simple errors, like people would leave off the country they were in. They just somehow thought everybody knew where they were, or their election office did, right? So there's simple errors that you won't make because it's a guided process. You can also send your ballot request right through our system in most cases, or you can download it, print it, and send it off. So that's the first thing. All right, so there's that initial, I'm abroad, I need to register as an overseas voter, and I'm requesting my overseas absentee ballot. That's that step number one, okay? Then definitely check with your election office if you don't hear from them. You can look them up in the election official directory. It's another service we have, not hard to find. You will get the name, the email address, the phone number of your election office. You can also check in the Am I Registered service to see if you're on the voter roll. If there are any red flags, you should have time to solve that. Don't wait. Do this now. If you want to check your election dates and deadlines, you can go into the election dates and deadlines service on our site. You can look up your state. You can look at overseas and military. Always check that tab, and you can see what the deadlines are. Okay? Try to shoot for, weeks and weeks and months maybe before the deadline. There's no reason not to, right? The sooner the better. And again, election officials, they're usually very friendly. You can call them, you can email them, you can ask them about the status. But I did drop that little note that we have, most of us as overseas voters have an overseas ballot tracking service, and you can go sign up for it. So after you've submitted your ballot request and you want to track your ballot and see where it is, see that it's been processed, see that that it's been sent to you, that it's been received, that it's been counted. You can go into usvotefoundation.org. There's a Where's My Ballot service. You'll see all these things are just on the top. Just scroll over the options. You'll see everything drop down. You just click on Where's My Ballot and sign up for ballot tracking in your state. That's another really great thing. So once you've requested your overseas ballot, you're expecting a confirmation. You will want to confirm it. You will receive your ballot in the way you request. What do I mean by that? On the form to request it, you're going to be asked, do you want it on paper? Do you want it online? If you've asked to receive it online, keep an eye out for the email or for some notification that it's there for you to download. And if you have trouble printing it, remember that it's probably better to open it in Acrobat Reader, shrink it to fit, size it. We have different paper sizes overseas, but you can usually deal with that in that way. If you have a problem, look, we've got a voter help desk. We have agents there ready to help you out. You can also call your election office. Let's say you don't receive the ballot. You can call your election office and they can send it again. Okay? All those services are actually there for you. Everything's online. Everything's been really changed in the last 20 years, really, really modernized and reformed. We were the first people to put the ballot request process online. We were also the first people to put the emergency ballot online. You can get that on our website as well. You probably don't need it because you can call your election office and get another one sent to you if you didn't get it, or if you lost it, or if it didn't work, or something like that. But it is there for you. Anyway, we were the first people to do that, but then a whole reform went through in 2009. It was the Military and Overseas Voter Empowerment Act, and it really required that the states modernize as well. So things have gotten better for overseas and military voters, and I really think there's no reason you shouldn't try it because so much of it's online, and that really matters being down in Mexico. I know it does.
Okay, so we've reached the point of the process where you've gotten your ballot, you've printed it, and this is definitely an issue. A lot of people don't have printers in Mexico, so go to your nearest papeleria. Normally is the place that has printers, and usually what you will do, what I found, is there'll be an email address there that says, like it's usually like a Hotmail address. It's like papeleria, whatever, February 5th. And you email whatever it is you want to print to them, and then they will go and they get the email and they print it out and they hand it to you and they charge you a couple pesos. It's actually very easy to get things printed. It's just that you have to go somewhere that has that printer. So you've got your paper ballot now from your state. And
then you want to vote that ballot. Well, maybe you want to study it first. I mean, prior to that, you can also look up your sample ballot prior to the election, a certain amount of time before the election. You may want information about how to vote. You could go to your party in your state and see if they have a slate or an endorsement or something of particular candidates if you're not sure. But you should have enough time with 6 weeks ahead. If you request your ballot prior to that, you will have your ballot as of 6 weeks ahead if you receive it online. Yeah. Now, a lot of people do like to get it on paper because then they can mail it back easily. But I don't know in Mexico what your mail system, I haven't heard the greatest things about it. I don't want to downplay a system that might be working just fine, but I haven't heard that too often about the mail in Mexico. On the contrary. So I would kind of recommend it online. Now, if you're wondering again, how can I receive it? How can I return my voted ballot to prepare for that? Go to the state voter information, look up voting materials, transmission options, look into your overseas chart on all the different ways. And maybe you're going to find out that you're in a state where they'll actually take your voted ballot online. That would mean that you need to scan it or upload it into a system. So, there are states that do take the voted ballot online. And that is not the most secure way to vote. However, if it's the only option for you, it's better than not. So you might want to look at all that and see, and a lot of your listeners are going to find out that voting abroad is kind of like really cool. That it's easy, that it's online, that it's not difficult. And when you do it on our system, you can also save all of your data in a voter account so that the next time you log into your account, most of your data is there. We do not store your ID, so you would have to put that in again. You'd want to check your addresses and stuff. But it's a lot faster the second time around. Yep. You can sign up for voter alerts. You can subscribe so you don't miss an election. They're state specific. So you'll be reminded. Yeah.
So essentially, I think in Oregon, I think I can email back my vote. And as you said, it's maybe not the most secure, but theoretically now they're going to tell me when they got it.
Yes.
And they offer that tracker for people here. Like I know I just recently voted in a primary election and I got the hey, we've received your ballot. We've sent your ballot to you. We've received your ballot. Like it's great to see all that process go through. If it was by mail, I'm going to have some recommendations. I don't have them in my top of my head, but I'll add those at the end of this video as to how to best mail something from Mexico because I don't want everyone sending FedEx.
I'm so glad you're going to do that because people use the smallest thing to stop themselves from voting. It might be one question standing between you and voting. Ask it. There's no question that's too big or too small for us. Really, we often get very involved with individuals who have a particular issue needing to vote. We call election officials on your behalf if it's necessary. We will help you get to the bottom of it. We have a great voter help desk. Use it. Use it. Don't let that happen to you. Don't use these tiny things as reasons not to vote.
Yeah, and this is, I think, a great time to talk about, you guys seem like the best resource, which is why I have you here that I'm talking to. But I did find a lot of other resources, but I also found websites talking about those resources saying that one's a scam or that one's just trying to steal your information or something like that. Things that were maybe not as well established as the U.S. Voter Foundation. So maybe you could talk. Are you familiar with any of these? Or
I probably am. First of all, let me just say that we started in 2004. So we're on our 20th year. I am an overseas voter. I was in Munich at the time, and I still am. I mean, at the time of founding the organization. I went to the consulate to see about registering and requesting my ballot. I didn't know anything about what I was doing, and I was handed this really blurry form and a 500-page instruction book. And let me tell you, I'm from the software industry. I'm not a political operative. I'm not even a poli-sci major, but I learned it. I learned a lot. But the toes popped that day. I just went, hey, there's got to be a better way. And I automated the process. After that, the Federal Voting Assistance Program, who is in charge of implementing the Overseas and Military Voting Program, they followed our lead and they put their process online as well. They also, that's the federal government organization, FVAP. for short. They're technically in charge. I think you can trust them for sure. Then there are party organizations. The Republicans have Republicans overseas or something. They're not as organized as Democrats Abroad. Democrats Abroad has the Vote from Abroad website. They offer also overseas voter services. Yeah, those are pretty much the top. I wouldn't stray too much further from those three. Of course, we're nonpartisan, non-governmental. We have our merits. Been around. We have a great team. I love working with our team. I love Overseas Vote, and it's of course close to the heart. And the reason we have our umbrella U.S. Vote Foundation website, that organization that's where all the moving parts services are. So you have both websites at your disposal. It was important because we wanted to bring what we had learned about absentee balloting to the domestic voters as well. We felt like, hey, we know how to do this. We can help people in the U.S. vote by mail as well.
That's awesome. And I hope that things become easier to vote, not harder in the U.S. But it sounds like for those of us overseas, it is easier in many cases, maybe not so if you're in somewhere like Oregon, which just makes it super easy to vote. Now, real quick question, like local elections. So what are your thoughts on that? When I request my ballot, and it will be requested from theoretically like the last place I lived in the United States. Absolutely. Is that correct? Like if I did move, it's just kind of, So
let me talk about that. When you fill out the registration and ballot request form, you're going to be asked for two different addresses. Okay. So the first one is called your voting residence address. That's kind of the technical name. It's your U.S. domestic, the last U.S. domestic address you had, or if you're going back and forth, it's the address you have. It's where you're connected to. It's not your grandmother's address or your aunt's address or any other address. And you do not, this reminds me of something you mentioned before, you do not need to receive mail there, okay?
Okay.
If you're living abroad, you will not be sent anything to a U.S. address. Forget it. Don't worry about that. It could even be an address that doesn't exist anymore. Let's say your former U.S. address was paved over. It's still where you used to live, yeah? That determines your voting jurisdiction. It determines which election office manages your request and sends you your ballot and counts it. So that's a very important address. And, that is your last U.S. residence. Then the next one is where you're going to be on election day. Okay? That it could be a hotel. It could be an Airbnb. It could be a school address. It could be a boat. Who knows? So, and if you're getting your ballot online, your email address, obviously your email address is vitally important. So let's call it 3 addresses, your email address being one of them. When you're an overseas voter, you also need to sort of classify yourself. You're asked if you are living abroad temporarily, if you intend to go back, if you don't know, if your return is uncertain. I check the box for my return is uncertain because I may never go back. I don't know. As much as I'm involved with the U.S. and the whole election system, I may never live there again. I've been abroad almost 30 years. So I'm going to check my return is uncertain. There is also another classification that is I was born abroad. If you were born abroad and maybe you never established U.S. residency. That's a separate issue altogether. We could talk about that. But let's say you are living abroad temporarily. You're down in Mexico. You are going back and forth. You are paying local taxes. You want a full ballot. You want to be able to vote local offices. You're paying state taxes anyway, right? But if you're like me, I'm living abroad indefinitely or permanently. My return is uncertain. I only vote at the federal level. What do I mean by federal level? I mean, I vote for offices for people who are sitting in Washington, D.C. That's the president, the vice president, U.S. Senate. There are 2 senators per state, and the House of Representatives. And that depends on population, how many reps you have. Okay? Mm-hmm. So I'm only voting for 4 offices when the president and vice president are together. So, yeah, I'm only voting for that. I don't, continue any kind of local thing in California where my voting residence is. So I'm only voting at the federal level. If you're at all concerned about tax implications, now a lot of people use tax implications as a reason not to vote. I can reassure you that voting at the federal level, there is no tax implication. If you vote at a local level because you're still involved and, living in your state part-time or owning property, and you're still paying state taxes, that's totally fine. Yeah? But I would say if you're at all uncertain, just vote at the federal level. And you can, even if you get a ballot that's a mile long with everything on it, you don't have to vote every race. You can say, I'm just voting at the federal level. Okay? So that's what I would use as a guideline. We have a great FAQ on overseas vote, and it tackles that issue as well.
Well, this is going to be interesting because as an Oregon voter, we all vote by mail, but I think I'm going to, because I will be in Mexico by the time November 5th rolls around, I think I'm going to do this process just to be able to do it, because it's exciting. And I'm going to be voting the entire ballot because I do spend time here. I am a tax resident of the United States. So this is actually a good way to help prove that I'm continuing to be a tax resident of the United States. This has been incredibly helpful. Thank you so much, Susan, for spending some time with us, sharing this knowledge. Yeah, do you have any remarks before we let you go?
I want to thank you first for your interest in the topic, for taking it on before 4 weeks before the election when everybody's panicking. Excuse me. And that's a good reminder. Take action early. It takes only a few minutes to sit down and register and request your ballot and send it off right through our system to your election office. Really, it's worth it. It's such a rewarding experience. And I know this was a lot of detail. I just want to say, don't get overwhelmed. Don't make it too complicated. Take some time and enjoy the reading on the Overseas Vote site if you have never done this before. But don't let it overwhelm you. You'll see when you go in to register and request your ballot, it's easy. It's information you know. You know your name and your birth date. You know your addresses. It's not hard. We do the hard part for you. We know what questions are special in your state, if there are any, and usually there aren't. And we know who you need to send the information to. We give you all the instructions. If you download it, you have several different options. So don't let that stop you. Try it. Give it a try. You'll see. You're going to be successful. And guess what? We're standing here ready to help you if you have any questions. The last and final note is, remember, Voter Help Desk. We have one, and it's there for you. And don't let anything stand in the way of you in voting. Our help desk can help you out. So happy voting. This election matters. Every election matters, but this one really does.
Yes, thank you so much, Susan. And this is actually great. This is the time for all of you to push pause on the video, go over to the website and do this, and then comment down below that you've done it. Or this is your other option. You got 2 options here. Comment down below that you are committed to doing it, saying, I am going to vote this election from overseas. I just want to see a bunch of those replies down there saying that, because once you've said it, you're going to do it. Come back with comments later to say like, hey, I did it. Just things in Mexico are difficult. I usually tell people, don't try to do more than one thing in a day, because just like, bureaucracy and whatnot, this is the easiest thing you're going to do today, which is just to do the registration online, get the ball rolling, and then you can check it off and spend the rest of the day at the beach and feel like you've done your one thing for the day. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Susan, for being here. Thank you to all of you who are going to vote in this election, and I will talk to you soon. Hasta luego.
Thank you. Bye.